The wind screamed through the valley like a wild animal. Snow tore across the tents, flapping them so hard they sounded like gunshots. It was supposed to be a calm night. The weather forecast had said clear skies, but now the mountain was awake, angry, and roaring. Zara pulled her jacket tighter, her fingers frozen and stiff. She had been on many climbs before, but this storm was different. It came from nowhere. One moment the stars were shining, the next the air turned white. The camp lights flickered, and the radio crackled with broken voices. "Rahim, do you copy? Rahim?" Daniel's voice shouted through the static. He was their lead climber, his beard crusted with ice, eyes sharp even in the dark. Zara looked toward the ridge where Rahim had gone with 2 porters earlier that evening. They were setting safety lines before the next climb. But the line was dead now, no answer came back. Then, through the noise, a single phrase burst from the radio. The voice was Rahim's, faint but shaking. "Too big, human." The signal cut off. Silence. Zara stared at Daniel. Did he say, human? Daniel nodded, his face pale. Maybe he meant a rockfall. Maybe his hurt. But the word human echoed in her mind, strange and wrong. The wind grew louder. A sound like thunder rolled across the glacier, only it was not thunder. It was deeper, slower, like the ground itself was breathing. Then the tent poles snapped. Snow rushed inside. Daniel grabbed her wrist. "Out! Now!" They ran. The cold bit into their skin. Visibility was 0. Lights from other tents vanished one by one as the storm swallowed them. Zara fell to her knees, her headlight beam cutting through a whirl of white. Daniel pulled her up, yelling something she couldn't hear. Behind them, something moved. A shape, tall, dark, walking against the wind. It wasn't running. It wasn't stumbling like a man would in the snow. It moved steadily, step after heavy step, leaving huge prints that filled with snow seconds later. Daniel turned his light toward it, but the snow swallowed the beam. The ground trembled again. Zara's stomach twisted with fear. The air smelled strange, like wet stone and iron. Then the mountain roared. A deep, rumbling sound shook the ice beneath their feet. The wall of snow above camp broke free, sliding, growling, turning into an avalanche that thundered down the slope. Daniel pushed Zara toward the crevasse edge, the only direction away from the flow. "Jump!" he shouted. They fell. Cold darkness swallowed them both. Zara hit hard, pain shooting through her side. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The snow sealed the light above, leaving only a faint blue glow. Everything was muffled, like being buried underwater. "Zara!" Daniel's voice echoed somewhere close. "I'm here," she gasped. He crawled toward her, blood on his temple. They huddled together, shivering, the sound of the avalanche fading above. Then there was nothing but the drip of melting ice. Zara's heartbeat thudded in her ears. Her face burned from frostbite. Daniel pulled out his headlamp and shone it upward. The crevasse walls glistened, smooth and alive-looking, as if breathing with the storm. "We're lucky," he whispered. "If we hadn't jumped." The radio crackled again. Both froze. Static hissed. Then, faintly, Rahim's voice. "Too big, human, not safe, move." And then, another voice. Not Rahim's. Low. Slow. A growl shaped into words. "You should not be here." Zara grabbed Daniel's arm. "That wasn't him." Daniel's mouth tightened. "Radio interference. It has to be." But deep down, neither believed that. They waited for hours. The storm didn't stop. Their breath made small clouds in the cold air. Zara thought about how the mountains always tested people, physically, mentally, but this felt different. It wasn't just the weather. It felt like something was watching them from above. When the wind finally eased, Daniel began to climb. The ice was brittle, cracking under his boots. He found a narrow slope and helped Zara follow. They emerged just before dawn. The camp looked like a graveyard of torn tents and buried gear. Snow covered everything except for a few broken poles sticking out at odd angles. 3 people were missing. Zara walked toward where Rahim's tent used to be. Her boots sank into something soft. She looked down, and froze. A footprint. Huge. twice the size of Daniel's. Deep enough to hold a bowl of melted snow. And there were more. Circling the camp. Daniel knelt to inspect one. No claw marks. No sign of an animal. Then what made it? Zara whispered. He looked up, his breath white in the air. Something that walks like us. She followed the trail of prints until they stopped at the edge of the glacier, where the snow dropped off into mist. The last one faced toward the valley below, as if watching them. A piece of fabric flapped near the edge, Rahim's scarf. It was torn, with something carved into the ice beside it. Zara brushed off the frost. Words. Scratched roughly with a knife or tool. Too big, human. Her throat tightened. The letters looked fresh. The sun rose weakly over the peaks, painting the snow in pink light. The world was silent again, too calm, too perfect, as if the mountain had gone back to sleep. But Zara knew better. The roar still echoed in her bones, and she could feel it, the sense that something massive, human or not, had seen them. And it was not finished yet. The cold was like a living thing. It pressed against their skin, filled their lungs, crawled into their bones. Zara's body shivered uncontrollably, her breath coming in short bursts. Daniel held her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders to share what little heat they had. They had spent the night trapped in the crevasse, unable to climb further without light or rope. The storm above had turned the world into a white wall. Time moved strangely, each second stretched like a thread of ice. When dawn finally came, it wasn't bright. The light above was gray and weak, filtering through layers of snow. Daniel stirred beside her. His lips were cracked, his eyes red. "We need to get out," he said. Zara nodded, though her muscles ached. She touched her side, sore, maybe bruised, but not broken. "The rope's gone," she murmured. Daniel looked up. The walls were smooth and narrow, but one side had small ridges of frozen snow. "We climb," he said simply. They took turns, Daniel leading, Zara following. The ice groaned beneath their boots, flakes falling into the darkness below. Halfway up, Zara's foot slipped, and her heart leapt, but Daniel's hand caught her wrist. His glove was torn, she could feel the rough skin of his palm. When they reached the top, the world was silent. The storm had passed, leaving a gray sky and a buried camp. Their tents were gone, buried under waves of drifted snow. Only the edges of sleeping bags, broken poles, and scattered gear marked where the team had been. 3 people were missing. Zara stood frozen, scanning the white emptiness. "Rahim," she whispered. "He was up on the ridge." Daniel moved toward what was left of the supply tent. The fabric was shredded, the radio gone. The silence was too complete, no wind, no birds, not even the distant crack of ice. It was as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Then Zara saw the footprints again. They began near the broken tent poles, large, perfect ovals pressed deep into the snow. Each print was wider than a man's chest, and spaced far apart, as if whoever, or whatever, made them had taken long, calm strides. Daniel crouched beside one. Still sharp. "It passed recently." "Could it be the smugglers?" she asked. "Smugglers don't make tracks like these." He touched the edge of one. "This is deliberate. Almost careful." They followed the prints around the remains of the camp. The pattern was strange. The tracks circled each tent once, then moved outward in a spiral. Like someone, or something, was walking a path of protection or warning. Zara's gaze fell on a torn pack near the mess tent. She pulled it free from the snow. The pack was Rahim's. Inside were a compass, a small notebook, and a carved wooden amulet shaped like a snowshoe. It was smeared with dried blood. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the notebook. Most pages were filled with weather notes and route sketches, but near the back she found something else. A short sentence, repeated 3 times in shaky handwriting. "Too big, human. Too big, human. Too big, human." Zara felt her heartbeat quicken. "Daniel, he wrote it here too." Daniel looked over her shoulder. His jaw tightened. He must have seen whatever it was. They gathered what they could, some food packets, a rope, 2 headlamps. Then, using the map Rahim had left behind, they began moving down the glacier. The air was heavy and silent. Every sound, the crunch of snow, the creak of gear, felt too loud. After an hour of walking, Zara stopped. "Look," she said softly. Far across the valley, on a ridge covered in mist, something moved. It was distant, half hidden in shadow. The shape was upright. Not a bear, not a man, it was too tall, too still. For a long moment, it didn't move at all. Then, slowly, it turned, and the reflection of sunlight flashed off something metallic on its arm. Daniel raised his binoculars. "What the hell?" he frowned. "It's wearing something. Like a suit or armor. Or maybe just wrapped in foil blankets." Zara's mouth went dry. "A person? Maybe. But what kind of person walks out there without oxygen?" They watched until the figure vanished into the mist. That night, they built a small shelter against an ice wall. Daniel lit the last of their stove fuel, the blue flame flickering weakly. The warmth felt like a miracle. Zara sat beside him, hands wrapped around a tin cup of half-melted snow. "Do you think Rahim's alive?" she asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer right away. He stared into the flame. He was smart. If anyone could survive that storm, it's him. But his eyes told a different story, one filled with doubt. When they lay down to rest, the silence pressed in again. Zara closed her eyes, trying to forget the storm, the prince, the words. But sleep wouldn't come. Somewhere in the dark, she heard a sound, soft, rhythmic, like slow breathing. She sat up. The sound stopped. Then, faintly, it came again. "Daniel," she whispered. He stirred. "What? Do you hear that?" He listened. Nothing. Then, one long, low groan echoed through the glacier, like ice shifting deep underground. Zara's skin prickled. "That's not wind." Daniel switched on his lamp. The beam caught something on the ice wall near their heads, scratches, faint but visible. She leaned closer. Letters. Too big, human. Fresh, as if carved while they slept. Zara's breath hitched. "Daniel, someone was here." Daniel grabbed her arm. "Pack up. We're moving now." They climbed out of the shelter into the cold night. The sky was clear, the stars sharp as glass. Snow sparkled under the moonlight, hiding secrets in every shadow. As they began to move, Zara looked back one last time. At the edge of the ridge, a tall figure stood against the moon, motionless, watching. She blinked, and it was gone. But the echo of the word stayed in her mind, too big, human. And this time, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a promise. The wind had softened by morning, but the silence that followed was worse than any storm. It wasn't peace, it was the kind of silence that felt alive, waiting. Zara and Daniel packed slowly, their faces pale and hollow from cold and fear. Neither spoke much. They didn't need to. The words "too big, human" had been carved inches from where they slept, and that said enough. They followed the frozen valley south, guided by Rahim's map. The lines were rough but careful, each circle marked with small notes in his handwriting. "Safe point, noise here, don't cross." The circles formed a strange pattern around their old camp. Zara kept looking at it as they walked. "It's not random," she said finally. "He was trying to protect us. Like a boundary." Daniel nodded, scanning the ice cliffs around them. Then what was he trying to keep out? The glacier stretched wide and endless, shining under a dull sun. Deep cracks ran across it like scars, each one large enough to swallow a truck. They moved slowly, using ropes to cross, but even then the ice moaned beneath them. Every sound echoed like a heartbeat. Hours passed. They found no sign of Rahim, no footprints, no tents. Just snow, endless and white. Zara's lips were bleeding from the cold. Her fingers had gone numb long ago. Still, she kept walking. She couldn't stop thinking about the figure they'd seen last night, tall, wrapped in silver, almost human. "Do you believe it was someone?" she asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer right away. "I don't know what I believe anymore," he said. "But whatever's out here, it's not an animal. It's too precise. It's watching." They stopped to rest near a ridge where the glacier dipped into shadow. Daniel opened his GPS tracker. The screen blinked strangely, the route line zigzagging back and forth. That's not right, he muttered. It's showing detours we never took. Zara leaned closer. The screen displayed a looping trail, almost like someone was forcing their path into a spiral, just like Rahim's map. Maybe it's interference, she said. Daniel frowned and opened the GPS pouch to check the batteries. Inside, folded carefully under the device, was a piece of paper. He pulled it out. It was a hand-drawn map, Rahim's, no doubt, but this one looked different. It showed the same area but marked with small red circles, each connected by a single thin line. And written along the edge, in shaky English, were the words, "Follow only the circles." Outside, noise walks. Zara stared at it, her chest tightening. Noise walks, she whispered. He said that on the radio. Too big, human. Daniel turned in a slow circle, scanning the horizon. The air shimmered faintly. Somewhere in the distance, a soft sound rolled over the ice, like a drumbeat, low and far away. Let's keep moving, he said. Stay on the path Rahim marked. They walked for hours more, tracing the circles as best they could. The sun climbed higher, throwing long blue shadows across the glacier. Zara began to notice things, tiny details that didn't fit. The air near some cracks seemed to pulse, like heat mirage. Once, she thought she heard footsteps matching theirs, but when she turned, there was nothing. By afternoon, their food was nearly gone. Daniel stopped to check the map again and frowned. We should have hit the base of the ridge by now. GPS says we're walking in circles. Zara squinted at the snow ahead. The landscape looked identical in every direction. Smooth hills, dark crevices, the same peaks on the horizon. We're lost, she said softly. Daniel shook his head. No. We're being led. What? He pointed to a narrow ridge up ahead. Look. A line of giant footprints, those same perfect ovals, marched straight toward the ridge. Not random this time. Purposeful. Guiding. Zara's throat tightened. They're leading us somewhere. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Or into something. They followed anyway. The air grew colder, thinner. The light dimmed as clouds drifted over the peaks. The prints stopped at a dark opening in the ice, a tunnel, half collapsed, its edges smooth as glass. Looks man-made, Daniel said. Zara ran her glove along the wall. Or melted. Inside, the tunnel was narrow, but the ceiling arched high enough for them to stand. Frost sparkled on the walls. At the far end, a faint metallic glint caught the light. They moved closer, slow, careful. It was a door. Old, rusted, built into the glacier itself. Faded letters were painted across it in English and Urdu. Polar Research Station, K-17, decommissioned. Daniel exhaled. A weather station. No one supposed to be here. These were shut down decades ago. He tried the handle. It turned easily. The door creaked open, revealing a small room buried in ice. Inside were two metal desks, a tangle of wires, and a wall of reel-to-reel recorders. Everything was coated in frost. Zara brushed snow off one of the reels and saw a label written in black ink, "Too big, human, log 5. Her skin went cold. Daniel found an old hand-crank generator in the corner and started turning. The lights flickered weakly, one bulb glowing amber. Zara loaded the reel onto the player and pressed the switch. The tape hissed. Then a voice, Rahim's, crackled through, tired and shaking. If you find this, don't trust the prints. They protect, but they watch. The sound, it follows the ice. It speaks through metal. Too big, human. Too big, human. Static swallowed the rest. Daniel looked at Zara. He was here. Before they could speak again, a new sound filled the room. Not from the tape, not from the wind, but from the metal door behind them. A slow, rhythmic pounding. 3 knocks. Then silence. Zara's pulse jumped. Daniel stepped forward, flashlight trembling in his hand. The knocking came again, closer this time, as if from inside the wall. Back, he whispered. Get back. The wall groaned. Ice cracked. A faint line of light appeared along the corner, widening, shifting. Then, without warning, something on the other side slammed against it with enormous force. The whole room shook. The reel spun off the player and clattered to the floor. Zara screamed. Daniel grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the exit. The light flickered once, then went out completely. Behind them, the last thing they heard was a voice, low, human, but wrong. Too big, human. You crossed the circle. The air outside the collapsed tunnel was sharp enough to slice skin. Snow blew sideways, thin as dust, biting at their faces. Zara and Daniel didn't speak for a long time. The noise from behind the ice, the pounding, the voice, still echoed inside their heads. It hadn't been human. It couldn't be. Daniel dropped to his knees, catching his breath. His hands shook as he checked the rope bag. We need to move, he said finally. His voice was hoarse, like it had aged a decade in an hour. Move where? Zara asked. The glacier stretched out like a white desert. The storm clouds were coming back. Higher ground, he said. There's an old ridge station somewhere above this section. If Rahim found shelter, that's where he'd go. Zara nodded, even though every muscle in her body begged her to stop. Her legs were weak, her clothes damp, but the thought of staying near that tunnel was worse. They climbed. The slope was steep, the snow crusted with ice that cracked under every step. The silence was absolute. No birds, no echo, just the hiss of wind brushing over rock. Zara's heartbeat was the only sound in her ears. After hours of climbing, they reached a narrow ledge. And there it was, a low metal structure half buried in snow, its antenna twisted like a broken skeleton. The door hung crooked on one hinge. Station K-17, Daniel murmured. It's real. They forced the door open. The air inside smelled of rust and frozen oil. The walls were lined with old instruments, barometers, radios, recorders. A thin layer of frost covered everything. It looked like no one had entered in decades. Zara brushed snow from a table and found a stack of notebooks. The first page was dated 1976. The handwriting was neat at first, then shaky. It described normal things, temperature readings, snow depth, wind data, until the later pages changed tone. Unusual sounds recorded below the ridge. Not wind. Rhythmic. Large footprints discovered near base. Crew afraid to go out at night. Local porters refused to stay. They say, too big, human. Zara's hands trembled as she turned the pages. The final entry was written in large, desperate strokes. If anyone reads this, do not follow the prints. They belong to the Watchers. They come when the circle is broken. Her breath caught in her throat. Daniel, they knew. Decades ago. Daniel was kneeling near a set of dusty machines. Look at this. He had found a tape deck wired to a small solar battery. Against all logic, the battery lights still blinked faintly. He pressed play. The tape clicked. Then came a soft hum, followed by voices. Base K-17. Reading anomaly near South Ridge. Pattern repeating. A pause. Sound confirmed. Frequency matches heartbeat. Unknown source. Another voice whispered, trembling, too big, human. Then came static. And beneath it, something else, like breathing. Slow, deep, steady. Zara stepped back. That's coming from under us. The floor vibrated faintly. Just once. Then again. Daniel switched off the recorder. The glacier's moving. Or something inside it is. They looked at each other. Fear had a new shape now, colder, quieter, more real. In the corner of the station, half hidden under a tarp, was a metal box. Daniel pried it open with his knife. Inside were small cylindrical objects, frozen solid. Blasting caps. Detonation cord. Old, but still deadly. A folded sheet of paper lay on top, an old blueprint showing tunnels beneath the ridge. The words across the bottom were in faded red ink, excavation site, restricted. Mining? Zara asked. Daniel nodded slowly. Maybe that's what this station really was. A cover. He turned the page. There was a diagram of something buried deep in the glacier, something shaped like a giant dome. The caption read, Unidentified subsurface formation. Zara whispered, What did they find down there? Before Daniel could answer, a faint sound echoed from outside, the crunch of snow. One step. Then another. They froze. Daniel motioned for silence and slowly moved toward the doorway. The wind had stopped entirely. The quiet outside felt unnatural, heavy. He pushed the door open just enough to look out. At first, he saw nothing. Just snow and shadows. Then his eyes caught movement, figures, maybe 3 or 4, walking slowly across the ice. They were tall, wrapped in silver suits that shimmered under the dim light. No faces. Just reflections. Daniel ducked back. "There's someone out there," he whispered. Zara's pulse raced. "Rahim." "I don't think so. They're too big." The door creaked again, this time from the wind, or maybe from something pushing it. Daniel slammed it shut and shoved a chair under the handle. Inside the station, the air grew warm suddenly. The temperature gauge on the wall jumped. The ice began to melt, dripping from the ceiling. Zara wiped her face. "Why is it hot?" Then she noticed the generator. It had come alive on its own. The red light blinked faster and faster. "Daniel, what did you touch?" "Nothing." The old speaker crackled to life. A deep, distorted voice spoke, calm, almost human, but layered with static. "You should not be here. The circle is broken." Every machine in the room began to hum. The reels spun by themselves. The tape hissed, spitting out words in different voices, Rahim's, Daniel's, hers. Voices that had never been recorded. Zara grabbed Daniel's arm. "We have to leave." He nodded, reaching for the packs. But as he turned, a red light started flashing on the detonator box. The tiny LED blinked faster, matching the hum's rhythm. Zara's eyes widened. "Daniel!" He grabbed the box, trying to pull the wire free. "It's armed." The sound grew louder, vibrating through the floor. The metal walls began to tremble. "Run!" he shouted. They crashed through the side door just as the first explosion tore through the station. Fire and snow burst into the air, blinding them. The shockwave threw Zara down the slope. She slid, tumbling, her world a blur of light and noise. When she stopped, everything was silent again. Smoke curled into the pale sky. The ridge station was gone. "Daniel!" she screamed. No answer. Then, through the drifting snow, she saw a figure walking toward her, limping, heavy, head bowed. Relief surged through her chest, until she realized it wasn't Daniel. The shape was too tall. Its steps were too slow. And as it came closer, she saw the glint of something familiar hanging from its neck. Rahim's wooden amulet. Snow swirled around the figure like a living mist, blurring its shape but not its presence. Zara stayed frozen, half buried in the drift, her mind refusing to believe what her eyes were seeing. The thing that stood before her wore Rahim's wooden amulet around its neck, the same one she'd found blood-stained days before. Its face, if it could be called that, was human but not right. The skin was stretched, pale and too smooth, the eyes sunken deep, like they had seen centuries. "Rahim!" Her voice cracked. The figure tilted its head. When it spoke, the voice came out broken, as if layered with echoes. "Too big, human." Zara stumbled back. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Then, through the blowing snow, another voice shouted, clear, human, desperate. "Zara!" "Daniel!" She turned just in time to see him limping down from the shattered ridge, face streaked with soot, a deep cut above his eyebrow. He looked barely alive. The figure turned toward him too. And in that moment, the illusion broke. The giant stepped forward, and Zara saw the trick. The shimmer wasn't skin, it was fabric. The broad shoulders were reinforced metal plates. The oversized legs had snowshoes, massive, oval-shaped, bolted together from steel frames. The same pattern they had seen circling their camp. Not a monster. A man in disguise. Daniel reached her, grabbing her by the arm. "Are you hurt?" "I thought," she began, her eyes still locked on the figure. "I thought it wasn't human." "Yeah," Daniel said grimly, "that's what they wanted." The figure, Rahim's impersonator, took one more step toward them. But before he could speak, another sound cut through the air, a sharp metallic click. A rifle bolt. A group of men emerged from behind a snow ridge, wearing dark insulated gear with no markings. Smugglers. Their faces were covered, their movements efficient. One of them shouted something in Urdu, and the disguised giant raised both hands. Zara realized then that he wasn't part of them anymore. Maybe he'd tried to stop them. Maybe he was Rahim after all, trapped in their game. The man with the gun barked again. The giant turned to Zara, voice trembling now. Go! Then the rifle fired. The sound cracked across the glacier like lightning. The man in the silver suit fell backward into the snow, the amulet snapping off his neck and spinning toward Zara's boots. She dropped to her knees, grabbed it, and ran. Daniel pulled her toward a narrow crevasse nearby. Bullets ripped through the snow behind them, sending icy dust into the air. They slid into the narrow gap, pressing themselves against the walls as gunfire echoed above. Minutes passed. The shooting stopped. Only the howl of wind remained. Daniel peeked out first. They are gone, he whispered. Zara's hands were shaking. She looked down at the amulet. The wood was cracked down the middle. Inside, something small was hidden in a hollow compartment, a folded strip of paper. She opened it carefully. A rough map again. The same circles and lines, but this one had words in Rahim's handwriting. They use the myth. The prince scare climbers. Not monster, men. Hidden tunnel east. Proof inside. Zara met Daniel's eyes. He was trying to stop them. He made the prince to protect us. Daniel nodded. Then we finish what he started. They followed the map, staying low, avoiding open ground. Hours passed as the light faded into gray evening. They found the tunnel, a natural ice cave hidden by a curtain of snow. Inside, the walls glowed faint blue from trapped light. And deeper in, they found crates. Old, rusted crates stamped with foreign letters and radiation warnings. Daniel brushed the frost off one label. Uranium. His voice went cold. They're mining illegally. Zara's stomach twisted. That's why they killed him. The too big, human stories kept people away. Perfect cover. They opened one crate. Inside were silver rocks wrapped in lead foil, and a notebook, half frozen shut. Daniel flipped it open. Inside were names, coordinates, and payment records. The amounts were massive. Before they could process it, a faint sound came from the cave's mouth. Footsteps. Daniel killed his headlamp. The steps grew louder. Voices, 2 of them. The smugglers were back. Zara and Daniel crouched behind the crates, holding their breath. One man entered, his flashlight beam slicing across the walls. Check the stock, the man said in Urdu. The second man grumbled something and walked closer. His light passed inches from Zara's face, but he didn't see her. He kicked one crate, muttered, and turned back. Then, her pocket radio crackled. A faint burst of static. The smugglers froze. Who's there? One shouted. Daniel grabbed Zara's hand and hissed, Run! They bolted deeper into the tunnel. Bullets followed, pinging off the ice. Zara's boot slipped, sending her sliding down a slope. Daniel dove after her, grabbing her just before she hit a frozen pool at the bottom. Keep going, he yelled. They crawled into a narrow side tunnel. The light from the smugglers' flashlights flickered behind them, bouncing off the walls. Zara's lungs burned. Her head spun. And then everything began to fade, the cold, the noise, even Daniel's voice. When she came to, she was lying beside a dying camp stove. Daniel had managed to start a small fire using part of the crate lining. His face was pale, his hands trembling. You passed out, he said softly. Altitude, exhaustion, maybe shock. Zara touched her chest. Her heartbeat was pounding too fast, too strong. But there was something else, a rhythm that wasn't hers. A faint echo, steady and soft, deep inside. Daniel noticed her expression. What is it? I don't know, she whispered. It feels like something's inside me. Like my heart's not alone. He smiled weakly, thinking she meant fear. You're just shaken. You'll be okay. But Zara knew it wasn't fear. It was something different, something impossible. She pressed a hand to her stomach, confused, trembling. The pulse was still there. The snowstorm had died, leaving the world unnaturally still. Zara woke to a pale morning, her throat raw and her thoughts heavy. The memory of the night still flickered in pieces, the gunfire, the crates of uranium, the impossible pulse she'd felt in her body. Daniel sat nearby, his face drawn and gray, staring into the fire he'd managed to keep alive through the night. "We're close to the valley," he said without looking up. "If we can reach the rescue base, we can tell them everything. The mining, the killings. Rahim's work won't die with him." Zara nodded faintly. Her whole body ached, but deeper than that, something felt off, too alive inside her, too aware. She pressed a hand against her abdomen again. That faint echo was still there, soft and rhythmic. They packed what little food remained and started down the glacier. The world looked different now, like it had been cleaned of color. The wind carried a faint hum, and every time Zara turned, she thought she saw movement far behind them, a shadow that always melted away when she looked directly at it. After 2 days of travel, they reached the lower ice fields. The snow grew thinner, revealing black rock and frozen streams. Finally, in the distance, they saw a rescue flag fluttering near a small outpost. A figure waved from the doorway. Zara felt her legs give out in relief. "We made it." The man who met them was wearing a rescue uniform, bright orange, clean. His name tag read Dr. Ahmed. He guided them inside, gave them hot tea, and started checking their vitals. "You're lucky," he said. "The storm report said no one could have survived up there." Daniel smiled weakly. "We had help," he said. Dr. Ahmed looked up. "Help?" Zara and Daniel exchanged glances. How could they explain it? The fake giants, the smugglers, Rahim's sacrifice? The doctor listened without interrupting as they told him everything. The more they spoke, the more his face changed, from disbelief to quiet dread. Finally, he said, "I've heard the stories. 4 years. About shadows that walk the glacier. But what you found," he paused, glancing toward the radio on the wall. "We'll need to alert the authorities." Hours later, a helicopter arrived to take them to Skadu. The noise of its blades filled Zara's head until she thought she'd cry. As they lifted off, she looked down at the glacier. The surface below shimmered, almost breathing. In Skadu, the police took their statements. A team was sent to investigate the ridge. They found the destroyed station, the crates, and several bodies. But there was no sign of Rahim or the man who had worn his amulet. 4 weeks, Zara and Daniel stayed at a local hospital while the authorities unraveled the mining ring. Daniel healed slowly, spending his days helping with reports and interviews. Zara, though, kept mostly silent. Something was wrong inside her. The doctors ran tests. She told them about the heartbeat she'd felt, how it started faint, then grew stronger each night. They smiled kindly, told her it was anxiety, or perhaps her mind's way of coping with trauma. But then they ran an ultrasound. The doctor stared at the screen, frozen. "Miss Zara," he said softly, "you're pregnant." The words didn't make sense at first. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I can't have children. I was told, years ago, my body." But there it was. A flicker on the screen. A heartbeat. Strong and steady. Daniel came running when she called him. His eyes filled with tears when he saw the monitor. He took her hand, whispering, "We survived everything. Maybe this is the mountain's gift." But Zara couldn't smile. Because deep down, the memory of that heartbeat she'd felt on the glacier returned, and it had sounded exactly like this. The days turned peaceful again. The snow melted on the lower slopes. Zara tried to believe it was all normal. But strange things kept happening. Electronics around her flickered when she was near. The hospital thermometer malfunctioned whenever she entered the room. Once, the radio crackled to life on its own, and through the static came a voice she recognized. Rahim's. "Circle, unbroken," it whispered. "The ice remembers." Zara dropped the radio, her skin turning cold. Daniel tried to calm her, but that night, she couldn't sleep. The baby inside her seemed restless, moving too early, too strong. She felt tiny flutters, then sudden stillness, like something listening through her heartbeat. Weeks later, during a follow-up appointment, the doctor frowned at the screen. "Strange," he murmured. "There's another signal." "Another what?" Zara asked. He turned the monitor toward her. Beside the first heartbeat, there was another. Fainter, but distinct. Daniel's mouth fell open. Twins. The doctor nodded slowly, uncertain. Yes, though they seem unusually developed for this stage. Zara felt tears in her eyes, but not all from joy. The mountain, the tunnels, the words, it all spun back in her mind. Too big, human. And now, there were two. That night, she dreamed of the glacier again. The air was blue and cold, the circles of footprints glowing faintly in the snow. A voice, Rahim's voice, spoke from the wind. You crossed the circle, and something crossed with you. When she woke, her heart was pounding, and so were two others inside her. Snow fell again that winter, heavy and silent, blanketing the world as if trying to hide the past. Months had passed since the ridge collapsed, since the world had learned about the illegal mining operation in the Karakoram. The headlines called it the Glacier Conspiracy. But Zara knew the truth went far beyond smuggling or greed. Some things could not be explained by logic. Some things lived in the space between fear and wonder. She sat by the hospital window in Islamabad, watching flakes drift past the glass. Her hands rested on her belly, now round and full. The twins moved often, restless, almost aware. Doctors called them miracle babies. Zara still hadn't found the courage to tell them about the strange rhythms that echoed when the room was quiet, how sometimes both heartbeats aligned, and sometimes they didn't. Daniel entered quietly, holding a paper. They've arrested the last of them, he said. The smugglers. The government's sealing the site permanently. Zara nodded but didn't look up. And Rahim? He sighed. No trace. They think the explosion buried him. Her throat tightened. He saved us. He warned us all. Daniel sat beside her. He believed people were the real giants, capable of both creation and destruction. Zara turned her head toward him. And which are we? Before he could answer, she flinched. They're moving again. He smiled gently. They'll be strong, like you. But she wasn't sure it was just movement. It felt like communication, gentle pulses against her palm, as if someone inside was answering a question she hadn't asked. That night, the contractions began. The hospital rushed into motion. Machines beeped, nurses shouted, lights blurred. Daniel held her hand as she screamed through waves of pain, her body caught between fear and wonder. When the first cry filled the room, she wept. Then came another, softer, echoing the first like a harmony. Twin girls. They were small, perfect, and utterly human. Yet, when Zara held them, she felt something vast in them, an old calm, a quiet strength. One opened her eyes sooner than expected. The nurse gasped. The child's irises were a strange pale gray, like glacier ice. Normal? Daniel asked. The doctor smiled nervously. Healthy, he said quickly. Just unique. After the birth, word of the miracle mother spread. Reporters wrote about her survival, the avalanche, the discovery of the mining ring. But no one mentioned the deeper story, the circle of footprints, the whispers on the wind, or the mountain's strange mercy. Zara and Daniel kept that between them. Weeks later, as the snow melted from the lower valleys, Zara received a small parcel in the mail. No return address. Inside was a charm, a tiny snowshoe made from scrap metal, and a folded note written in Rahim's hand. Not a monster. Not myth. The circle was never a cage, it was a promise. Remember, human hearts can be too big or just big enough. Zara pressed the charm against her chest, tears falling silently. Rahim was alive. Somehow, somewhere. That night, she dreamed again of the glacier. The sky shimmered with green light, and the mountain breathed softly like a sleeping giant. In the snow, two small sets of footprints appeared beside her, glowing faintly blue. She knelt and touched one, it was warm. When she woke, the twins were stirring. She whispered to them softly, "You're my proof that the impossible can be kind." Daniel stirred beside her. Still dreaming of the mountain? She smiled faintly. Maybe it dreams of us. In the months that followed, Zara and Daniel testified in court. The world learned how greed had turned legend into camouflage. The giants were men in suits of steel and fear. But one mystery remained unsolved. Why had the ridge collapsed long before the detonator was triggered? What made the glacier move like it had a heartbeat? Scientists blamed underground heat, seismic shifts, gas pockets. But those who had been there, the rescuers, the climbers, spoke quietly of a sound they'd felt more than heard. A slow, deep pulse beneath their boots. When the trials ended, Zara and Daniel left for a small town near Hunza, where the mountains looked softer but still ancient. Life became quieter. The girls grew fast, their laughter bright, their eyes clear like mountain water. Sometimes, when storms rolled in, the radio would hiss softly, and a familiar voice would whisper through static, Rahim's calm tone, repeating the same 3 words, "Too big, human." Daniel would switch the radio off, smiling. "Maybe it's just the wind," he'd say. But Zara knew better. One evening, when the twins were almost a year old, she took them to the hillside behind their home. The sky burned orange with sunset, and snow dusted the far peaks. The girls toddled across the grass, their tiny hands clutching each other. Zara noticed their footprints forming side by side, and between them, faintly, one large print appeared in the soft soil. It was there for only a moment before fading with the wind. She smiled through her tears. "You're watching us, aren't you?" she whispered to the horizon. Daniel joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You think Rahim's still up there?" "I think something bigger than us is," she said. "And it listens." They stood together in silence as the first stars appeared. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, low and deep, like the slow breath of the world itself. Later that night, Zara tucked the twins into bed. The snowshoe charm hung above their cradle, glinting in the lamplight. She whispered a final story to them, her voice soft. "Once, the mountain roared. And people ran in fear. But it wasn't anger, it was warning us. Not about monsters. About ourselves. Because sometimes, humans can be too big, too proud, too blind. But love," she touched their tiny hands, "love fits just right." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying a faint echo across the valley. It wasn't a roar this time. It was a sigh, gentle, grateful, human. And in that quiet, Zara finally understood what Rahim had meant. The circle had never been about fear. It was about the size of a human heart, and how even on the coldest mountain, it could still hold warmth enough to wake the earth.